Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to walk through my annotated copy of School Days. As I mentioned in the discussion post, I will be uploading these. They will be in the week 3 folder. It'll be in the presentation, the first folder of week 3, part 1. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk about here is the dominant impression that begins School Days. I hated school. There's your dominant impression, right? And when we get to description, which we will in week 3, you will learn that a dominant impression is like your overall thoughts or feelings on a topic. Normally, it accompanies a description. Here, it's just like the thread that kind of gets through the whole thing. She hated school. And so that's what that's the problem. Some of you noticed in your responses, you wrote things like, this went from a problem to a solution. And you mentioned things like it's not a solution that you liked necessarily, but it was that narrative arc. So the problem is she hated school. And then the so what is how she learned to deal with that hatred. Okay, so that's called a dominant impression. It's that overall sense or feeling about something. Again, usually used in a description as the first sentence. Okay, when we look at this one, I think that the main thing that Rose is dealing with here is she's dealing with her mother's optimism and enthusiasm, and then, of course, feeling unable to be honest with her. As far as the craft of the writing, a lot of you mentioned the simile that was in paragraph 3, the culture spun around me like a vortex. You really understood how that made things feel swirling and confusing and hard for her. The illusion, some of you mentioned in paragraph 5, where she says the Wizard of Oz had nothing in his bag for Dorothy. She had nothing to smooth this assimilation for me. You recognized the illusion, and it's a clever one, alluding to the very end of The Wizard of Oz, where they finally find the wizard, and he has a bag of tricks, and he gives the Tin Man and the Lion and the Scarecrow what they wanted, and then he goes to Dorothy. She wants to go home, and of course he's like, I have nothing in my bag for that. I can't help you with that. So there's your illusion. It's nicely done. Because you really feel the hopelessness of Rose's situation. Okay, so I want to talk about further paragraph 9. The ideas and content in here are just fantastic because you've got the figurative language of personifying English as if it were hiding. And that's so nicely done. And here you have in paragraph 9, the English language revealed itself to me. She says later, I pursued their secrets. It was like lifting a layer of film. And then she uses words like obscure, shed light. All of those have this, or provide this image that English is hiding from her. Okay, if you think about how this story is broken down, you've got the beginning part, and then you have like kind of the setup to the whole hating school, struggling with the language, and then you get the little anecdotes. The first one is about the dolls, and the dolls scenario is super powerful because of the judgment that Rose receives. So she takes a risk, takes her doll to school, even has to deal with her mother's questions. The teacher asked us to bring her doll. She lies to her mother to cover it. And then at recess, paragraph 15, the other girls all pulled out their dolls. It made me want to laugh out loud. They'd all brought the very same one. I proudly pulled out my baby doll. Now, you know what's going to happen. But you are in that story with that scared and little girl, and you know it. You know what those girls are going to do. So when the next line comes, I want you to think about why the dialogue was included here. Why does Rose choose to include the dialogue? What is that? Mona scrunched her nose at my doll. Don't you have a Barbie? You can hear how Mona sounds. You can even picture her scrunching her nose. You probably want to hurt Mona at that moment because you understand what an uppity little, we would call in the South, a snot, she's being, right? And then, of course, she sounds like the leader of the pack of girls. And so, of course, the other girls respond in kind, and Rose is humiliated. And then she tells you, I would not be invited to play with them again. nor would I be invited to Mona or any of the girls' birthday parties. So this was a huge moment it isolated her big time. And it's just so sad because here she thought she had this special doll. Her doll was different. And then, of course, that was the problem. Okay. Now, if you look at paragraph 18, and that's why I hated school, you can see I annotated it's a repetition of the dominant impression. Again, that moment, that isolation, she was isolated by language and isolated now by that whole social order. So then she's also isolated from the teacher. The teacher doesn't like me. I'm always trouble because I talk too much. And then you have the mother trying to solve it. She's trying to solve it, and she sends in homemade enchiladas. Now, I know when you got to that part, at least when I got to that part, I was worried for her because then you understood that after the doll incident, this would feel really risky for Rose to walk into the school with a plate of enchiladas, a whole plate of enchiladas. She knows culturally that this isn't what kids do. And so she's really worried about it. So there's some anxiety and there's suspense being built in this part. So as far as a narrative structure, that's really well done. So she's nervously, paragraph 28, walking straight to the classroom. She avoids the other students who she knows those conversations won't go well. She arrived breathless, anxious thoughts popped into her head. What if her teacher was disgusted? And she says, I would not be able to bear it. And you get that. What a risk. So when she does give the enchiladas to Miss Lewis, and Miss Lewis replies, enchiladas, paragraph 33, she cried out, I love enchiladas. How did your mother know? And I loved that part. I shrugged happily. How did my mother know? Well, her mother didn't know, but how cute that a little girl would perceive it that way, like her mother had some kind of power that she knew that Mrs. Lewis was going to love it. Bless her heart, Miss Lewis clapped her hands together. Homemade enchiladas. How lovely. There was a lot of suspense in this scene. And so it was really nice the way it worked out. You felt proud of Mrs. Lewis and you felt hopeful. Rose felt hopeful too. So again, think about why the dialogue was included there. Why did Rose choose to zoom in on that moment and make it an active scene with dialogue? So think about that for a minute. And I could answer that question to you, but I think you should probably try to think about it on your own. Then she says, but is a contrasting word, right? It's a transitional word because here we're hopeful. And then she says, but not all situations could be solved with homemade enchiladas. And then you're thinking, well, crap, things must not have all gotten better then. So then you understand it's the whole cupcake story, right? And then her mother says, well, I don't know what a cupcake is. And she tries to explain. And then her mother comes up with a dessert that's not right, that won't work. And then, of course, the teacher's response. Oh, no, dear. Again, why is there dialogue here? Why did Rose choose to include the teacher's response? A lot of you had in your responses how upset you were with the teacher's response and how ridiculous you thought the teacher was being. So think about it. Is that why she included it? So then you have her mother who's trying to make everything better, make cupcakes from a recipe. Probably you have this idea that they're from scratch. And of course, she even makes the icing from scratch. And of course, that's wrong. And Rose knows it and she brings them to school. And you know that what they're going to say. And then in paragraph 45, when they say yuck, you were like, crap, oh, kids are mean. That's what you're thinking. And so that last incident, coupled with the others, is where Rose leads you to her so what, which is at the very end. It was the beginning of a subconscious effort to keep my private life and school life separate. If the other kids didn't know about my home life, they would assume I was like them. I could be American at school just like everybody else. And as long as anyone who really mattered never came to my house, which was not difficult since we lived way out in the country, they'd never know the truth. There's your so what. Keeping her private life and school life separate. That's how she solved the I hated school thing. So there's your resolution at the end. A lot of you mentioned it's sad. It's not the resolution you wanted, but it is what she decided to do. And there was her solution. Okay, so think about the narrative arc. Think about the choice of little stories that all led up to the so what in the end. Think about the choice of dialogue. Think about the dominant impression that ran through the entire thing that set up the problem that then needed resolved. Think about all of those things as you move into writing your own narrative.